Today, I want to discuss with you what I consider to be the 5 biggest problems in how we teach science in college. My name is Christian and I'm a college instructor at Community College of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I have several years of experience teaching both math and physics at the college level. And throughout my teaching career, I've learned something very important about knowledge and teaching in general. Knowing something is very different from knowing how to teach something. And my entire teaching philosophy has been built around this single point here. So in this short video, I'm going to discuss with you what I consider to be the 5 biggest issues that we have in how we teach science. Number 1 is teaching facts instead of teaching understanding. There's a tendency nowadays to teach science as a laundry list of facts rather than teaching understanding. But a list of facts is not science and it's not teaching. Science is a way of understanding the world around us, not facts that happened in a historical pattern. Teaching is also not the mere act of feeding facts to the students. Teaching is more a process of intellectual involvement that encompasses many factors. In order to teach the students to think critically about the world that surrounds us, we must strive to teach the students the facts, yes, but in a coherent way as a unified body of knowledge, so that the students do not only learn the facts, do not only learn the equations, but also they learn how everything is connected and how one fact, one equation follows from the previous. It is only at that point that the students really get the essence of science as it is. And this is also very important because while concepts that we teach make perfect sense to us as instructors, it might look very confusing or disconnected to students, especially if they've seen them for the first time. 2 is teaching how, but not why. And this to me is generally a consequence of the previous point. Because we're so used to teach science as a list of facts, we also generally teach students how to do something, but we fail to teach them why they're doing something. And this is one of the biggest mistakes we can make as educators, because if we only teach the students how to do something, we're essentially teaching them how to follow directions. But it's only when we teach the students why they're doing something is that the moment when they're able to connect the dots and understand not just how to follow directions, which is absolutely useless in science, but we also empower them with the ability to solve problems and, even more importantly, ask new questions in the future. So let me give you an example that I encounter often in my physics classes. When I teach the calculus-based class, my students have to take calculus before. So of course, all of them know how to do a derivative. Now, if I write on the board something that says, here's a function, find the derivative, everyone knows how to do that, even with the most difficult function. But then I ask them, what does this derivative mean? Very few students understand that, physically speaking, the derivative represents a tangent line at a point, and therefore, depending on what their function was, that derivative could be a velocity, or could be an acceleration, or could be something else. So the students learn very quickly how to do something, but they fail to understand why they're doing something or what that something means. And that by itself is a missing link that causes big problems in the student's understanding. Number 3 is ask the students to memorize equations and facts during the exams. I'm very much against it, and I just think it's plain silly and counterproductive, and it helps no one, both on an intellectual level and on a practical level. Intellectually speaking, there's no place for memorization in science whatsoever. So there's no point in asking the students, essentially punish them by asking them to memorize equations and numbers and quantities and facts during an exam or a test. It seems to me, and I might be wrong, that when instructors do this, it's generally because instructors are too lazy to write their own exams. They'll rather pick the problems from a test bank, and because they want to avoid the risk of the students bringing notes and textbooks that could potentially have the answers to those test bank exams, they will rather say, I'm going to use the test bank exams or the test bank problems for my quiz, and I'm going to ask you to memorize everything so that you don't have to bring your textbook and perhaps find those answers in the textbook. So if you care about your students, spend an extra hour writing your exam, but then let them use the textbook. Because this brings me to the practical level. Ideally, higher education should also prepare the students to eventually enter the workforce, where they can apply their academic knowledge to work as project managers, researchers, and so on and so forth. And if you're working on a project in a work setting, you will never be asked to memorize anything, and we all know this very well. So this idea that students should memorize is counterproductive to their training, because when they enter the workforce and go to work as researchers for a university, or they work on a project for a company, they will actually be encouraged to do the opposite, to look up resources, to reference books, textbooks, articles, use computer programs. So why make the students memorize when it's just a punishment and it doesn't help them in the long run? Number 4 is rushing to complete the curriculum. This is one of my pet peeves, something that I've experienced on the other side of the spectrum as a student, and something that I always avoid doing in my classes. Have you ever been in one of those classes where the instructor states that he or she is going to cover a certain amount of chapters at the beginning of the semester, and then they realize throughout the semester, maybe halfway through, that they're going too slow, or maybe one class was canceled and they're falling behind? And instead of adjusting the pace of the class and saying, well, we cannot cover all the chapters, but let's make sure that we do whatever we can do as well as we can do, they just rush through the material because they have to get to that deadline that they put in their syllabus. But what is the point of rushing if it's not just a desire to stay on track? And does you staying on track help your students learn better? Is learning a matter of quantity or a matter of quality? Because if it's a matter of quality, it's not necessarily true that the more you cover, the better it is for the students. Actually, there's an argument to be made against that. Because if you rush just to stay on track, aren't you doing that at the expense of depth and clarity? And that is also going to hurt the students overall. I believe it was Euclid who said to the ruler, when he was asked whether there was sort of a shortcut to learning geometry rather than his elements volume, Euclid replied by saying, I'm sorry, but there's no royal road to geometry. And royal in that sense referred to a shortcut, because there was a royal road that was built as a shortcut between two cities. And I think Euclid's words apply to science as well. Unfortunately, there's no shortcut to learning science. And trying to compress 2 weeks of work into 1.5 lectures just won't cut it. It will give you a feeling that you're teaching that stuff, but the students will not retain it. They'll forget it after a week and they'll have to relearn it, or they'll have a gap in their learning which will affect the way they learn the future things. So overall, it's going to hurt the students in the future no matter what. And finally, we come to number 5, which is not showing enthusiasm for what you're teaching. And I think this is the most important point of all. We always demand so much from the students, both in the classroom and outside. But why should the students care to learn about anything for which the instructor, who is essentially the vehicle for the learning process, show no interest? This is something that I experienced as a student while I was in grad school. Most of my professors were essentially full-time researchers who had to teach classes, but they clearly didn't enjoy it. They were negative in the classroom. They were very dismissive when the students asked questions. And the whole thing made my experience a very miserable and negative experience in grad school. And I know that this type of behavior will eventually frustrate and turn off even the most passionate of the students, because negativity is contagious. On the other hand, if you're passionate about what you're teaching, if your students see that you're enthusiastic to go to classroom and talk to them about whatever you're teaching, electromagnetism, classical mechanics, quantum physics, then also positivity is going to be contagious, but in a good way. It will attract the students who maybe didn't care about physics in the first place. And this is something I get very often in my classes. I might not be a great instructor, but my students see that I'm passionate about what I teach, and they end up telling me, you know what, I took your class, I was a little suspicious because I never liked physics in high school, but you were so happy to talk about physics every morning that you made it fun, and because it was fun, it became interesting. It was a pleasure to come to class, and eventually I got interested in it. And maybe next semester I'm going to take another class. So always show enthusiasm. And hey, my point is, if you're teaching, it's probably because you chose to be a teacher. And if you're not passionate about teaching, maybe you shouldn't teach in the first place and stop being miserable in the classroom and ruin the student's experience. So to summarize and clarify, these are the 5 biggest mistakes that I've noticed we as educators make. And I say we because I include myself in this. This is not a critique to other people. I'm not saying that I'm better than other people. I'm pretty sure I make a lot of mistakes when I teach, but these are the 5 biggest mistakes that I have experienced from my instructors when I was a student, and I notice most of the instructors make now that I'm an instructor myself. And I believe that if we as instructors try to address proactively these issues, we will make the teaching a lot more effective, and it will just make the student's experience overall a lot better. So thank you for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye.